Hello, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks. It's the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. Although the message "never again" still sounds loud and clear, the threat of nuclear annihilation is very much present in our lives. And to talk about it more, we're joined by Heinz Gärtner, Professor of Political Science at the University of Vienna. Good afternoon.
Good morning.
So, right after the tragedy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, people were determined to prevent it from happening ever again. Well, now we hear that having a nuclear weapon is the best, the safest way to maintain peace. What's your view on the matter?
No, we don't know. Of course, during the Cold War, we had this concept of deterrence. That means the threat with nuclear weapons should keep peace. But we don't know whether that's true because we cannot prove why something didn't happen. So it's a correlation, not a causation. So to rely on nuclear weapons for peace would be the wrong choice. Primarily, there have to be diplomatic means and conflict prevention and war prevention measures to keep the peace. Otherwise, even if we rely on deterrence, there can be miscalculation, there can be accidents. There can be reckless leaders. So diplomacy would be the way to do it. And I'm convinced that also during the Cold War, diplomacy was the primary reason why there was no nuclear war.
Right now, there are treaties banning the proliferation of nuclear arms. The question is, are they working at all?
We have had a lot of treaties, of course, arms control treaties, but most of them, after the end of the Cold War, have been expired or abandoned. There's one treaty, as you mentioned, proliferation, the non-proliferation treaty, since the 1970s. More or less, it worked because there was no large horizontal proliferation of new nuclear weapon states. So far there are 9, and the 4 of them have been permitted by the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. But of course there is a loophole, or maybe there are 2 loopholes in the Non-Proliferation Treaty. First of all, it of course wants to foster the peaceful use of nuclear energy, but it's difficult to tell when the peaceful use ends and when the use for weaponizing the nuclear material starts. And the second loophole, of course, is that nuclear weapon states are required to disarm, to negotiate disarmament of nuclear weapons in good faith in Article 6. And critics of this treaty say this did not work because nuclear weapon states did not really seriously negotiate disarmament.
So to sum it up, is the number of warheads, nuclear warheads around the world, dropping or growing?
It was dropping since the 80s. The number was much higher during the Cold War, but what we do have is a modernization of nuclear warheads, and also they are getting smaller. They have higher yield. That means that they're much stronger than Hiroshima, for example. And then making them smaller means that there should be more. Deterrence should be more credible because the credibility to use them would be higher. Of course, on the other hand, also the attempt to use them would be higher because if they are smaller, there is this assumption that the damage would be not as high. I do think that's a wrong assumption.
Mm-hmm. Professor, now we can easily agree that a global nuclear conflict would lead to unthinkable consequences. But do aggressive totalitarian regimes like North Korea and to some extent Iran as well see it the same way?
Of course, there are wars between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states. So it does not really, nuclear weapons do not prevent conventional wars. We see it since the Korean War. We also saw it in Vietnam, and also in the Falkland Wars at Argentine, Great Britain, and also between two nuclear weapon states like Pakistan and India. So they all fought conventional wars, and existence and the possession of nuclear weapons did not prevent conventional aggression to some extent. So we have to be careful to rely too much on the nuclear weapons. Of course, also we see that in the Ukraine-Russia war, that threat by Russia, so indirect threat by Russia to use nuclear weapons does not, of course, the resistance in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do you rate NATO's nuclear preparedness in comparison to what Russia and China have in their arsenal?
More or less, we have two big, large nuclear weapon states, and that's the Soviet Union, that's the US. And by and large, they have the same number of nuclear warheads. So that's more than 90%. Of course, China is increasing their numbers, but still it's below the level what the nuclear weapon states, the big nuclear weapon states have. So if there are arms control or even arms reduction talks, these states, China, Great Britain, France, they would argue the big nuclear weapon states should start to reduce their arsenals before they want to join in to reduce or to participate in arms control negotiations.
Mm-hmm. Now, lately Western experts alarmed that Russia may be planning some nuclear explosions on Earth's orbit to paralyze Western surveillance drones and global communication systems. Now, if it does occur, in fact, would it be an excuse enough to start a nuclear war down here on Earth?
Of course, we have a treaty which was adopted right after the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, the limited nuclear test ban treaty that prohibits nuclear tests in the atmosphere, in air, and on Earth. So that would be clearly a violation of this treaty. This is one of the few treaties which are still in place. So, but testing, of course, nuclear weapon states are still playing with the idea to test a real bomb. So far, they argued we can simulate it with computer testing. So a real test, of course, would be a signal that there is a preparedness for a nuclear war, what would be disastrous, of course. Also, I have to say rhetoric matters, even so it's only rhetoric. Rhetoric can also escalate and lead to a security dilemma. That means if somebody threatens with nuclear weapons, then the other states would feel uncertain and prepare for a nuclear weapons exchange as well.
Mm-hmm. Professor, now lastly, the very inventors of atomic bomb, they also invented something called a doomsday clock, and it's still ticking. It is now 89 seconds to midnight. That means basically the annihilation of mankind. Now, do you agree we're that close to disaster?
This doomsday clock, of course, it takes into account many factors and variables, not only nuclear weapons, but also risk factors. But it's as close to midnight, it's closer to midnight than it was ever before. So they see that the situation is more dangerous than during the Cold War now, because of course we don't have arms control agreements, working arms control agreements anymore, and there are mutual threats, and even some states play with the idea to bring nuclear weapons into play indirectly, like Russia did. But we had this in military conflicts and in wars before. It always happens when there's a situation of war. So war prevention would be the best prevention of the use of nuclear weapons.
Heinz Gärtner, Professor of Political Science at the University of Vienna, was our guest this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
You too. And thank you for watching and stay with us for much more news, interviews and analysis here on TVP World.